Okay, Mick, thanks very much for doing this, mate. I've been very excited to talk to you and very grateful for your time. Firstly, and most importantly, mate, how are you? Where are you? And have you enjoyed a bit of a break since the end of Super Rugby season?
Yeah, look, yeah, I'm good, thanks, mate. It's great to catch up. And I'm currently in Fiji, so I moved over here in July, and um, I had a bit of a break post Super Rugby, just a few weeks back home in Oz, and then headed back here to set us up. It's our first time back at home. We spent last year overseas, so in Australia. So got back in July, and the boys have been sort of training just in the gym and in their home bases. And then we came in full time about 3 weeks ago. So it's been good.
Nice, mate. How was the last year for you? Obviously, chaos all over the world with COVID and the pandemic and trying to keep sport going. I know that the Fijian Drua boys and the team and management had to sacrifice a lot last year. What was it like? Where were you based? How did you go about attacking everything? Because basically, starting a new team from scratch is incredibly difficult on its own. But then you throw in all the challenges of the last couple of years. Can you summarize or talk about what the experience was like?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure I can put it into a few enough words, but I think we started basically, I think 3 weeks after we put a team together. We had to relocate into Lennox Head out at New South Wales. Beautiful area
Not a
there.
bad spot.
Great spot. And the facility there, um,
Were you at Lake Ainsworth?
yeah, Lake Ainsworth facility is awesome.
Yeah.
And the staff there couldn't do more for us. But we, basically starting from scratch, we came together, and day one we were training. So we didn't have a chance for planning or anything. We just got into it. And yeah, we brought a whole lot of players from all different areas, from the island, from overseas, Australia, New Zealand, UK, off the island. And, some of our players, probably 60% of our players off the island hadn't done anything since October 2020. So it was nearly 12 months. It was just on 12 months, they hadn't done anything. So you can imagine the shape they were in when we got them. And it was a real challenge. All new staff working together, all players working together for the first time, but having to get on with it day one. And just, I think that was it was a good thing in a way, that we just had to get on and do with it. But we made some errors at the beginning there around certain things, but we learned on the run and we adjusted pretty quickly.
What did you learn on the run, if you don't mind me asking?
I think I learned a little bit more around educating versus expecting. I think when you come into a role like this, you know where you want the team to be, and probably for me it was just a matter of taking slowing down a bit and starting afresh, with a bit more education and understanding about why we need to do things, rather than expecting everybody, including all the staff, to know why are we doing this, and it was just a matter of starting. It was a good learning curve. Again, go back and revisit some of the principles that you have in your coaching, is, why, what, how, and probably jump straight into the what in a not desperate, but in an excited way to get stuck into it. We just got stuck into the what's and probably hadn't explained enough about why we were doing stuff.
Was a little bit of that, like I know some of the guys in the team, your Joe Tamanis and your Isoa Nasilasilas. Was it a little bit teaching them how to be professional rugby players? Because I know for some of the guys, it was their first experience in a full-time program. Is that kind of along the lines of what you're referring to there?
Yeah, it is definitely along the lines. Understanding what professionalism means. I mean, these guys have all can play rugby, and they've got natural talent for the game. It was probably just how to live like a professional athlete, how to eat like a professional athlete, how to train like a professional athlete. And some of these guys, and the guys you talked about there, it's great to see Ice away with the Flying Fijians. My understanding is he's starting this weekend against the number one team in the world.
He wanted me to ask you if he could be captain next year as well. So I've got to make sure I get that in.
Yeah, no, that's all right. He can ask. There's no problems with asking. there's always, if you don't ask, you don't get, So
yeah, exactly right.
You can always ask. But I think the challenge for them was what it looks like to be a professional, to change the diet, to get up the next day and go again. And I think their understanding about where they were at, so they felt, not those two guys in particular, but our whole team probably felt, we're good rugby players. We know what we do. We can do it really well. And we started training, and, probably the results we were getting from them were about a 5 or a 6, maybe 4 or 5 out of 10 as far as world rugby or sort of super rugby standards go. But for them, it's probably an 8 and a 9. They've trained as hard as they've ever trained, but they were still only really at the standards of, halfway to where we needed them to be. So that was a real challenge for us to help them understand they might be training the hardest they've ever trained, but they're still only halfway there.
Yeah.
And so bringing them along, I think that was what I'm talking about before, about the education and learning, sort of, understanding where they think they're at, where they are at, and where they want to get to.
How did you help them along that path? Because I can imagine it's a funny position to be in. Ultimately, Super Rugby and professional sport is judged on results, but you really have to do that step-by-step process to actually get to where you need to be. Was it a matter of just sitting down with the guys and going, look, your GPS numbers here are okay, but we need you up here? Was it just something that was a gradual process for you and the coaching staff?
Yeah, it was gradual. I think because we needed to bring them along the road. Like if we didn't make it gradual, we could have lost them along the way. But
yeah,
was also trying to push them, because we started in the middle of November and our first game was in February. So, we didn't have time to muck around. And, if we were too patient, or, we sort of were too gradual in the descent, in the ascent, we may not have got to where we needed to get to in time to start playing and be competitive. So
yeah,
we had to push through with a little bit of hope that they understand we're taking them down the right road, and drag them along the way as well as help them get there. So yeah, it was a bit of a, but what I found about this group of players, the most resilient group of players I've ever worked with, they don't whinge, they don't moan, they just get on and do. And, we took them down the sand dunes last week to finish a little block here, and, they did 2 hours on the sand dunes. And, when you talk about sand dunes and you think about as a kid, in Australia going to the sand dunes, it was a bit of fun, so these sand dunes, you never see anything like it. And not one player was whinging the whole day, they just got on and did. So I think that part of it was massive for us in their ability to do the work and just get on and do the work. It was quite inspiring watching them go through that process.
What about some of the off-field stuff, like creating a team culture, values, having a team story? Because starting a team from scratch, I'm curious about this for a selfish reason. I've just joined the Hunter Wildfires, who have just rejoined the Shoot Shield the last couple of years. Yep. How did you attack that as a head coach, trying to build, some kind of identity that the team could play from?
Yeah, I sat down. I mean, I'm a big believer in creating your identity and working through that. And, a small number of changes can change that. A small number of people coming in, even just one influential person coming in, can change a culture. So it's very important that you can establish something. One of the key things you try and do is create sort of a culture within a team. And what I found when I started was I just started looking at things and working around how I've done stuff in the past. And we already had a culture. We had an existing culture that you couldn't you couldn't ask for, you couldn't manufacture if you tried in any environment. So,
Yeah.
we had a strong Fijian culture. Go back to the village, the roles that the people have in a village, and we just built off that. And it was about enhancing that. Also, there's a strong connection to faith and family. So it wasn't about trying to create a new culture. It was about, there is already an existing culture within this team. What do we need to do to bring it into a professional environment as such? So our values and standards were on field and off field, were driven by those values of faith and family and the cultural aspect. An interesting part was how we meld the traditional cultures with the performance culture. And, there was a couple of challenges there initially, but mainly around, Ratu, a leader in a group, what the expectations are around that, the chief, and understand that we're all chiefs or we're all warriors, no matter where we are when we're in the Enduro environment, we're all the same, whether we're all leaders or we're all chiefs, we're all warriors, it doesn't matter. We are all together. And that was strong as well. Then it was just adding some professional standards in there so that we could adhere to those to get the best out of everybody. I don't think some of the players understood the professional side of the game, what it takes to be able to get up and go again. And, in the past, maybe, the partying, the going out late, the different foods, the different drinking, whatever that was, and then being able to get up and get on with either the rugby at your club level that you're at, you can't do that anymore. You're going to get left behind. And that was some of the standards that we built into our cultural, our values and standards.
Did you find it challenging, or challenging is probably not the right word, but how did you attack it? Obviously, you're an Australian. You've gone into a Fijian team, and it's a Fijian club team, but it's effectively the Fijian team for all effects and purposes. And I've got a lot of Fijian friends. They're all wonderful characters, and I love them all very much. But it's definitely a different culture from the Australian culture. A lot of positives out there, definitely. How did you attack that? Did you have to learn the Fijian way? Did you kind of mold some of yourself to that, or was it kind of trying to meet in the middle a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good question. Good observations. I think, I heard Nathar Thawanibuka, was with the Olympic team. He's basically he's our S&C, our head of athletic performance, but he's also culturally very strong, and he runs our Lotu, our prayer. And I sort of lent on him a lot around what should I be doing here, or how should I be here? And they just wanted me to be a leader. They wanted to know that it didn't matter what race it was. I had to, you just have to portray the leadership that they're looking for, and they just needed direction. And probably the errors like there was a balancing act between coming down on them and in the discipline areas and forcing them through without losing them through, intimidation or fear or things like that. So, it was a balancing act. And as you say, you know quite a lot of them, and I've coached quite a few of them in the past. And, to have a whole lot of, to have 37 Fijian guys on the training field at the one time, you've got to allow it to happen. You're going to see some things that you just not used to seeing on a rugby field, and you've got to let that happen. And you just got to throw your hands in the air and go, wow, what just happened then? Just and accept that this is life. But at the same time, not abdicating the game plan to them, but certainly giving them some freedoms to express themselves.
One thing I've noticed over the last couple of years watching the Fijian national team, and I do a lot of highlight reels for a living, so I've got to see some of the forward play. And I remember when I was a kid, every Fijian guy I knew wanted to play on the wing, whether they were 145 kilos or 85 kilos. But it seems like the standard of forward play has improved dramatically. Is that something with the Drua that you spent a lot of time focusing on that specific set piece role within your team?
Yeah, I think like one of the things that when I came into rugby, I had my own little thoughts on the game, because when I came into the game, I played it all my life, right? So I played rugby and rugby league all through schoolboys ever since I was 6. And then when I left and came back into rugby, and I'd spent time in the AFL, one of the key things in the AFL, the game had gone away from, if you're a back pocket or a half-back flanker or a forward flank or a forward pocket, it didn't matter. Your role was around the ground and you had to become a running player, distribute off both feet, both hands. Yeah, you had to develop skill sets that maybe only other players in certain positions had. So if you're a half-back flank, you had to develop the skill sets of a winger because you had to now do a lot more running. You had to distribute more. You had to do a lot more of not only the defensive side, but you had to be an avenue for attack. So your skill sets needed to improve. And when I came into rugby, I felt back in the mid-90s when I came into rugby, there was a real, you could nearly put a line down the middle of the field. You guys do this and you guys do that. So the forwards, you just carry the ball, smash it up, clean out, give it to the backs, and the backs play. And the backs, you play. And what was happening was, I sort of felt that if I could get the forwards to play like the backs and the backs to play like the forwards, then we could actually get a game of rugby going, a decent game. So if I could get the forwards to catch and pass like backs and backs to clean out like forwards, we could actually keep the ball alive across the field, not just hit it up, try and get across the gain line, throw the ball out to the backs. And, when I joined, there was things like forwards just get out of the way of the backs when they're running, and things like that were common in the game. And so the areas that probably you had the biggest growth in, it was probably the tight five, getting the tight five to catch, carry, run, pass like backs. And if you can do that, then you can have some really good options around the tight area. You can get tight forwards involved in counter and turnover and all that sort of stuff. Because that's always been something that I really felt where when I came into rugby we could sort of work on. And now when you come into the Fijian side, they've already, like the forwards already, as you say, they already do that. The problem with the things we have to do is be a little bit more conscious of some of the responsibilities around maintaining possession. And all our players like that. So it's a little bit more technical, but at the same time, you don't want to stifle their willingness to play, but you've got to also now make sure that they maintain and respect possession of the ball, and play through there. So I think it's there's no question that every Fijian prop's got a back trapped in there somewhere. There's no question.
After your first season as a Drua head coach, looking back, what do you believe it takes to be successful at Super Rugby level?
Oh, how do you put that down? Obviously, if you've got a good squad, that's going to help you. But I think fitness and strength. Your ability to stay in the game and fight it at the top end. To be able to play at pace. To get around the field at pace, and to get on and take contact and get up and go again and get hit again and get up and go again and still there, and in the 70th or 80th minute of the game still be able to get across the field from line out scrum as a forward pack and be the first arriving player. And it's a real fitness challenge. yeah, rugby's very important. There's no question. You need to be able to play rugby. But the game now around the fitness and strength components, your ability to fight in contact, get up off the ground and go again and repeat efforts is massive. And I think the teams that are having the success are the teams that have got themselves in the ability to not only have a good team and good talent, but also to have the ability to repeat efforts and go again.
Yeah, so we're just saying you've obviously had a lot of experience at Test rugby now as well. Is there a difference between being successful at Test rugby versus being successful at Super Rugby, or is a lot of the same things transferable?
Oh, look, there's a lot of the same things that are transferable. Test rugby is a moment though. Like you know, they talk about you've always got next week, but in Test rugby you don't really. You know, like you don't really have next week because you know you lose. You next week's just another new game. You know, the Bledisloe Cup. You know, you can't lose too many there, and you can't win the Bledisloe. You know, whereas Super Rugby, you can get up next week and still, it's like English Premiership.
Yeah.
You know, the top 14. You can have moments where you don't win, and then you get up and you go again next week, and you got to get up on Monday and go again. A lot of times with Test rugby, you know, you're in there for a 3-week window, or you know, come a World Cup, you're there for hopefully 7 weeks. You know, but you know, World Rugby, the way it is, the Rugby Championship now is sort of 2 weeks on, 1 week off, sort of thing. So you come together for a couple of weeks. You know, so you have these where you can prepare for little blocks of time as an international window, get up, throw everything at it for a couple of weeks, and then you know, you have a week off, or it's like at the moment in the autumn series, you're going to throw everything you can at a 3-week or 4-week test window. So the intensity of your games is increased probably at international level, but your weekly training intensity, I find, is a lot more in like Super Rugby. Your training is constant. The attrition of training, the load of training, and all that sort of work is quite heavy at Super Rugby.
Okay, so they back you off a little bit for Test week and focus more on detail and your role within the team so that you get it spot on game day. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, I think, you know, tests. I mean, certainly when I was involved, we still did a lot of building and a lot of teaching and a lot of skills work and all that. But you are there for 3 weeks, you know, and they are big test matches. You know, at one stage there, I'll be pretty sure I'm quoting this right, but you know, when GPS first came in and accelerometers and all that sort of stuff, at one stage there, they told us that Richie McCaw had just survived 6 car crashes, you know, the effect on his body. So, you know, test match rugby is at that level. You've got all the best players of Super Rugby representing New Zealand and Australia, and they go at each other. It's like in the English Premiership, you know, and like it is at the moment this week. You know, the best players from the countries it's brutal collisions. But I think the attrition of getting up and going every week adds a weight to it. You know, and I know in the English Premiership, those players, you know, have spent some time there. You know, to get up and go again, that's the real sense of get up and go again if you're playing in the English Premiership, because it's a big year.
Yeah, they don't get much break, do they? I think it's like 9 or 10 months a year, just pretty full on.
Yeah, and they've got a couple of competitions they slip in and out of, so it's pretty attritional but yeah, I think the test match rugby, you know, building up for a test match, there's a lot of things that you do week to week that are the same. You know, your training programs are very similar, but I think the mental side of the prep is a little bit more intense coming into a test match, because with your club rugby, if you like, Super Rugby, English Premiership, you know pretty much what you're going to be doing each week. Is, you know, you've got the same band of players you've had for 12 months, all sticking together. You know, a lot of times in Test rugby, there's new players coming in. learning new things. I enjoy both styles. But yeah, they are similar, but they also have their little differences. Their little bit of idiosyncrasies are a bit different.
What makes someone a great player versus a good player? So you just mentioned Richie McCaw. Obviously, Dan Carter's up there as well. Your Michael Hoopers. What makes them special?
Oh, I know what they do to become special. Um, there's no coincidence. They do the work. They work harder than anyone else. And that's not taking it away from any player that's out there who works hard. These guys just work harder. They're the last ones on the track. They're really focused in what they're doing. Training, like in the programs I've been involved in, the team training will finish and then you'll get into your individual training. So, what we call sort of IPPs, individual performance plans, you'll get into those. And so it might be that you finish training and then the number 8s will go away and work on a bit of the back of the scrum play. The hookers will go away and work on some striking. The wingers might go away and work on a bit of evasion and high ball catch, and everybody goes away and works on their individual parts of their game. Well, when those guys, when training finishes, they don't stand around and chat and waste the 20 minutes by looking busy. They just get on and do. They go and get the ball. They go and get a tackle bag. They go to the coach that they need to coach. They go and they just start doing it. And they work on it with a focus. And it's no coincidence when I started with the Wallabies that the guy that just came over and started, a guy like David Pocock or Michael Hooper, they just come over and they start. And there are other players that'll stand there and they'll be doing some work, but they'll take a few minutes to get going and they'll take a few minutes to wind up to it. And, if there's a 20-minute window to work to 20 minutes, they may get 16, 18, 12 minutes of work in. Whereas those guys, they'll get 20 minutes of work in. They'll start straight away and they'll keep working through. And they'll also have a plan. They'll know that today I'm going to work on this and this and this. And some players will finish training and it'll be, right, let's break onto our individual plans. And now my role in a couple of those environments was to help the players set up those plans. But at the same time, you're sitting down with a player and you say, let's have a look at your weekly plan. What are you going to work on Monday, Tuesday? What are you going to work on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday? And those guys would have a plan already laid out. They'd know that they're going to do this on this day, this on this day. I'm going to work on this. And their weekly plan would be completely laid out for them. And they just get on and do. And I think that's, they get there because they may not necessarily be the most talented player. And in a case like Richie McCaw, his game for his position, I think, changed around 3 or 4 times in my time with him. He went from being purely a fetcher to a link player to to attack. He had to work on his tackling because, when they first started, he was just a fetcher. He just went in and, then all of a sudden he couldn't be that tackler come fetcher anymore. He had to tackle and release, and he had to probably reinvent his game 3 or 4 times through his career, and he just did. He just worked on the next thing. He became a key restart receiver for us. He was the isolated player in the middle of the field, and so he'd work on that every day. They just work on their game, and as I said, it's not taking away from other players, but they have a real focus in the way they do it.
What made the All Blacks, or what makes the All Blacks so successful?
Well, I think it helps being the number 1 sport in the country. Kids grow up wanting to represent that team. I know it's an old cliched line. People dream of being an All Black, but they do. The kids grow up wanting to be an All Black. Everywhere you go, rugby's played. There's tremendous coaching going on. The players, it's a Kiwi thing. They're quite the humility is really strong. They give back to their community. So you'll see a lot of players, and I know a lot of communities do this. I'm not saying they're the only ones that do it, but these guys are they're there. You'll see these players giving back to where they came from, back
So
to the
they have an
grassroots
attachment.
game.
They have an attachment to who they're playing for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they go right back. They go right back to their grassroots, and they'll go back and they'll be part of the community when they get back there, and I think that just fosters a real, a real passion for the game from young players coming through. Also, so when I started back there in 2005, it was, the individual development aspect that only just started to happen, and they really took to it. They really took to, how do I get better? What can I do to get better? And when you're dealing with pretty good rugby players, it's a challenge as a coach. How do you make them better? And so you've got to spend some time, and you've got to know what you're doing. You've got to spend some time on how am I going to make this player better? And once you can do that with them, they'll take to it straight away. They understand if they're getting value from you. If you're giving them stuff that works, that makes them better, they'll get value from it. They see that and they'll work away at it. If it doesn't help them, they'll take it on board. They'll say, yeah, but if it doesn't help them, they'll move on to something else. So the real challenge is you've got to continually develop yourself as a coach so that you can make those guys better as well.
How did you initially get involved with them?
Well, probably a bit of a twisted tale, but I went over to Scotland, and I was coaching over in Scotland, and I met Todd Blackadder, who was at Edinburgh, and I got to know Todd well, and he and I got on well off the field as well as on the field. And he saw what I was doing at the national team, and he got me to do a little bit of work with his Edinburgh team and etc. And then Steve Hansen was coaching Wales, and I got to meet Steve, obviously coaching, and because through Todd I got to meet Steve. Tony Gilbert was coaching the Borders at the time, and we sort of got to the end of my time in Scotland. Tony Gilbert came back to Otago, and he took on a role with the Otago Rugby Union. I'd finished up at Scotland and was working with Saracens, and I just happened to be over in the off season of the Northern Hemisphere, which was the NPC time in New Zealand. And Tony just sort of rang me up and said, would I be interested in coming over and spending a couple of weeks in New Zealand and working with some of the NPC teams down on the South Island? Because Tony liked what I was doing over there in Scotland. So I came out and I worked with Canterbury, Otago and Southland. And I just drove down the east coast of the South Island and did some sessions there, and organised with Tony. There happened to be a session I did at Canterbury. The All Blacks were training there that day, so I did a session with the Canterbury team, and I saw Steve Hansen there and said good day. And then the following year, I was with Saracens, and I just got a phone call out of the blue saying, would I be interested in meeting up with the All Blacks team manager, because All Blacks had done a 204 and felt that they needed to work more on their kicking and skills sort of areas. And because I'd met Steve Hansen, he'd mentioned my name, and through Tony Gilbert mentioned my name, and then Ozzie McLean had been at Canterbury. My name came up in conversation, sort of those three areas. So they came and spoke to me over in England, and then they flew me out to New Zealand, and I met up with Graham and Wayne Smith, who I hadn't met before, but I obviously knew Steve. So I just met Graham and Wayne, and from that meeting, I was offered the opportunity to join them.
What's it like walking into that environment? Obviously, rugby people are the same everywhere you go, but Like you've just walked into the most successful sporting team of all time. Probably at that time they'd gone through a little bit of a downturn by their standards. But what was it like being in that coaching staff, walking into the team? Like, were you intimidated? Were you comfortable? What
I
what
don't think
what
I was. I
what
don't.
were
I'm
your
not
recollections?
comfortable. Yeah, I'm not. I don't really feel comfortable whenever. Doesn't matter what team I walk into. I never really feel comfortable. But I know what you're saying. I wasn't intimidated, but I was certainly on alert. I needed to be. I needed to know what I was doing. You do your prep. You got to do your prep. I learned a long time ago. If you do your prep, then you're going to be able to get the work done. So, and I knew, I was an Aussie, walking into a New Zealand rugby environment. Um, so I knew all those things, but I just needed to make sure I was ready to do my job, and I was confident in what I can do, and stay focused on the process, because your mind can get away from you about what if this doesn't work, or what if they don't like what I'm doing, and you have those sort of questions, no doubt. That's just human, but at the same time, you say, well, I trust in what I do. What I do, I know works. I've got to have belief in it, and get on and do the job. And the first couple of sessions was more challenging for them than me, because I was getting to do stuff they'd never done before. And so I knew what I was doing, and they didn't have a clue. So it gave me a little bit of an upper hand there. But they worked really hard at it as well. And it was from there on. It was the being able to have challenging conversations with both players and coaches. I think was probably the biggest thing I learned there.
What made those guys good coaches?
Well, I think when I joined them, they'd all been head coaches, and I think that makes you a better coach. Knowing
Why?
what you want from your system. I think knowing what you want from the support. Like if you're a head coach, you know what you need. And sometimes if you've been a head coach and then you go back as an assistant, then you sort of know what the head coach needs. And I think in that case where Steve Hansen come back from being, a very good, successful coach at Wales, and Wayne Smith had been a head coach at the All Blacks and then Northampton, came back as an assistant coach. And then Graham's the head coach. These guys know what a head coach needs from an assistant coach. They actually know what's required. So they get on and do. They make sure that the head coach is never wondering whether they're doing the work, or whether they know what they're doing, and you keep the head coach in the loop. I think that's one of the things that you always want to know. What I'm finding as a head coach, you don't like getting surprises from your coaching staff. You turn on the track and you're like, oh, what are we doing here? Didn't know we were doing that. That stuff is, there, and that didn't happen. Those guys knew as assistant coaches, communicate strongly, share what we're doing. Everybody's in the picture, have good clarity, and everything will work well. And plus, they were great at their jobs. They're great at what they did. They had great knowledge. They had, they were ahead of their time as far as what players needed to be doing.
You mentioned having tough conversations. How did it work in that environment? Was there a process to deal with disagreements? Like Graham, being the head coach at the time, had the ultimate say. Like was there some kind of process to have that, or was it just a general understanding that you and I disagree with each other, but we're going to talk respectfully but honestly and openly, and then come to the best conclusions? Like, was there a process there?
No, I wouldn't say yeah, there was, but I wouldn't say it's like a process that you set up and, right, let's get the checklist done here. It was just what you did. You would have honest conversations, and the understanding at the end of the day, and Graham made it clear at the start, that he will want to know exactly what your thoughts are, and he'll give you every opportunity to talk. But at the end of the day, if we can't come together, he'll just make what he called the coach's call. He'll just make the head coach's call, and that was accepted. And so I mean, I probably, to give an example, in 2008 we wanted to change the way we were kicking, and the ELVs came in. And when the ELVs came in, everybody thought these new rules were going to open up the game and we're going to get this fast flowing game of rugby now because the ELVs have come in. And all it did was turn the game into a kick fest, and there were games where there was 70 kicks. You go back to that year of ELVs. There were games where there was, in NPC and different games around the country, around the world, there was like 40 or 50, 60 kicks a game. And I remember sitting down with Graham and Wayne and wanting to talk about some thoughts around the kicking game. And we sat down and I started talking to Graham, and he didn't like what I was saying. And we argued away and we debated away, and 8 o'clock came, and then 9 o'clock came, and 10 o'clock came, and we're still in the room, debating away. And Graham said, I think I better open a bottle of Pinot. So he opened a bottle of Pinot, and we kept going. And look, this is absolute the way it happened. And then about midnight, he turns around and he goes, well, yep, okay, you've got me. Tomorrow morning, I want you to present that to the team. So presented it to the team, and we changed a lot around the way we kicked. We did a lot more contestables and a range of different things that we brought in. And a few weeks later, we were sitting down at dinner, and Graham said to me, he said, this seems to be working okay. We're going along okay with this. And he said, it's good. I like the plan. It's going well. And I said, yeah. I said, on that night, we argued, we were there till like midnight with this. What were your thoughts there? He said, oh no, I agreed with you at about 8 o'clock. I'd agreed with you. It sounded really good, but I just needed to know you believed it.
Yeah.
Because it's a little bit different. It was a little bit different to what we were going to do. He said, but at about 8 o'clock when you started talking, it started making sense to me. But I needed to make sure you believed it. So, and I think that's that conversation, that probably the next 3 hours of conversation was like open. There was no arguing. It was like, no, I want to, this is what it is. Well, why is that? And it became that sort of honest conversation where nobody's going to have a win. You're explaining. He asked questions, you explained, you asked questions, why that is, and then you come up with the answer. And I think that's when you have those that's what I really learned from that group, was have the conversation without trying to win the conversation. Have the conversation so that your thoughts are out, their thoughts are out. And you know what? It's probably somewhere in between is a great place for us.
Let the best ideas win. Doesn't matter whose they are.
Yeah, exactly. And if we can't get there, he's just going to make a head coach's call, and you accept that, And so we had a real disagree. I know it's a cliched line, but back then, I hadn't heard it before. Back in 2005, we had a real disagree and commit process to it. So we'd leave the room, and I mightn't have agreed with it. And when we leave the room, a player might come up to you, or someone else might come up to you and say, oh, what are we doing this for? This doesn't make sense. Now, I may have not agreed with it either, but I would say, no, this is why we're doing it. We're doing it for this reason.
So you had to buy into it.
That's how you disagree and commit. Not like come out, where I've been in some environments in the past where you come out and a coach will go, oh, well, I didn't really agree with it, but we'll get on and do it. Well, that's not disagreeing and committing.
Yeah.
That's disagreeing and not committing. So there's and I think in that environment, it was a real genuine disagree and commit mentality.
You mentioned before that you needed to always constantly try and improve yourself as a coach. How did you, or how do we as coaches go about doing that? Did you have a process that you would go through to do yearly personal development? Did you talk to people? Did you have mentors? How did you attack it?
Well, the first thing I wanted to do was to get better at what I do. And so understanding what I do was probably the first thing. So what I did when I came into rugby was I was a skills coach. I'd previously been a head coach in Aussie Rules. I'd been head coach of the state team and things like that. And when I started in rugby, I was back being a technician, back being a skills coach. So then I needed to learn about how the body works, and I dabbled in a lot of it previously in Aussie Rules around the kicking game and trying to understand where your power came from and how you generated power. And I think, one of the things that had been told to me as a player was that my skill level is really no different to the skill level of a cricketer in the park. If you can drive down and watch Saturday afternoon cricket in the local park, and you can pull the car up and watch, and you'll see a bowler come in and he'll have a nice little action. He'll roll his arm over and the batter will step inside and he'll hook the ball to the fence and it'll be looking perfect hook shot. Or he might step forward and play on a cover drive and you go, geez, that's a great cover drive, and it looks perfect. But the ball's traveling at 100 kilometers an hour or 110 kilometers an hour. And so, when you look at that, perfect technique, etc. But then you watch the test cricketer, the ball's traveling at 150 k's an hour and he's playing the same shot.
A different pressure.
The difference between is not necessarily the technique, but the ability to do it under pressure, time pressure, and fatigue. So therefore, I need to be able to quicken up my skill action. So everything I do, I have to be able to do quicker and more efficiently because I don't have the time. So the higher up you go in your sport, the less time you have to perform the skill. So that for me was the first thing I had to learn. So how do you perform? How do you increase the speed of something? So obviously I started looking at this is back in the mid-90s, looking at biomechanical stuff, and something that hit me was force. Where does force come from and how to generate force? And, just working through that. And that's how I got better at what I did, was understanding how the body generates force, through without getting into the big science of it. The first time I'd heard about, the coupling movement of eccentric to concentric, how do I become an explosive athlete? And therefore, for a pass, for example, I don't need a big wind up to make a big pass. I can actually punch it off my belly button 12 meters accurately if I learn how to use the joints. So, when you look at the force, for example, and torque, they were the two things, force and torque. So the torque being the movement of the joints and the force being the movement of the muscle. So how do you combine the movement of the muscle with the movement of the joints? And I just studied that. I went away, I just did it, for 12 months. And I've got cases and, much to my wife's disgust, I've got boxes and boxes of paper there, but I've got every paper that was ever written on force and torque, to understand how I can generate that explosive power. So that was what I did, but I knew what my role was. So how do I get better at that? If I'm a head coach, now I'm listening to, I'm watching, the Sabins of the world and these guys who have been great head coaches and what they focus on. And, I've spoken to other coaches and I listen to other coaches and, I chat through, about the head coach stuff now and understand a little bit more around leadership and guiding and my roles now around being a strategist, a mentor, and a facilitator as a head coach. So they are three things I've got to get good at. So now I focus in on how I develop those. So once I know what my role is, I can focus in on how I can get better. Because the key role is if I can get better, I can help my players get better.
Have you enjoyed the head coaching role?
Oh, I love it. It's been a challenge, no question about it. But, everything about being involved in professional sport's a challenge. From the simplicity of knowing that you're only employed for 2 years, if that's your contract. When I played, I went through that. Every couple of years, my career could have been over. As a player, I think you feel a little bit more in control. You feel like, you're going well if you keep working at your sport. You know the level of footy you're playing. You keep getting stronger, fitter, faster, more skillful. And if you're playing well, you know that you're probably, if this team doesn't want you, there'll be a team that wants you, if you're still playing good footy. As a coach, you get to the end of your sort of contract time and you're just not sure if there's another team out there that wants you. So that's a bit cutthroat in the business, but I've been doing it since I was 17. So it's something I sort of just accepted as a way of life. The challenges around the head coach is a lot more involved than being on the field. So I think I struggled with that last year when I was on the field a bit too much and probably didn't do enough mentoring in the role. And so, I think I've learned from that. But I think just being involved in the game, whether you're a head coach or an assistant coach, it's challenging, but it's also massively enjoyable.
When you say mentoring, do you mean improving your assistant coach's skill sets as well as your players? Like, is that something you spend a bit of time on?
Yeah, well, I didn't spend enough time last year. I spent probably, from where I'd come, my background of being on the field with the players, so I think, working with the staff and mentoring from that perspective and the freedom for them to grow is probably massively important. Not probably, definitely is important. So that's an area that, when you talk about how do you get better, that's an area that as a head coach, I can get better at in that area and working through that process.
Mate, look, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I've just got a few rapid fire questions. Have you got time for just a couple more?
Yeah, mate, I've got as much time as you want. So
I could talk all day.
Well, so could I, if you haven't guessed. But just, mate, I'm happy to go for as long as you want. No problem.
Awesome. Well, I might dig into some of the skill development part just quickly, because I know I've got some nerdy listeners who will go, you're talking to a skills coach who's worked everywhere. Let's go into that a little bit. So listeners, I'm doing that for you and for myself as well. I do want to learn about this. When acquiring a new skill or honing an existing skill, how do you break that down? So let's use the scrum as an example. I'm a scrum coach. Is it a matter of having body shape under no pressure and then gradually applying more and more pressure until it's as close to game-like situation as possible? Or how do you think about that? What's the way to break that down?
Well, it just comes back to, again, understanding what you need to be doing. So if we look at scrum, for example, we know that our players need to be, pushing through their glutes. So it's basically a horizontal squat. They need strong back, they need strong neck, they need strong core. So in a lot of times when you're teaching skill, it's not about the will. Like, if it just was up to what you wanted to do and it was up to the will of something, I'd be a professional golfer. That's what I would do if it was just purely for my will. If all my willpower I wanted, because that's all it took. But I need to be able to swing a little bit better than I swing. So I'm not technically good enough. So it doesn't matter how much will the prop has. If he hasn't got a strong core, hasn't got a good neck, and all that other work, you can give him great technique and you can say, right, but if he's not strong in certain areas, he's not going to get there. So the first thing is understanding, what does my body need to do to be able to be good at this? Then it's the technique side of things. And if you're looking at scrum, the angles of the leg, the knee, how it generates power, you get in behind, is everything in line? So a lot of times it's more comfortable, guys. And scrum's an interesting one, because some players think they're actually stronger in a certain position, but their body's actually stronger, and you've got to get them used to being strong with you know, feet, like if you're looking from behind the scrum, you know, the feet, the calves, the hammies, the glutes, the back, sort of got some alignment. Sometimes they'll drop their feet out, so their calves are pointing inwards, their thighs come up, point sort of there, and then their back's up on it. So once you get all that right, then it's a matter of teaching them how to push, you know, and all that. So, you know, for example, we might just lean in against a sled and put enough weight on it to be really hard to push, but be able to push, lean in and push. And the first thing you'll see is the sled will come up off the ground. It'll just come up, because as they go to push, they might push up a little bit. Yeah. So we'll stay there until that sled stays on. When he pushes, it stays on the ground. There's a whole range of little things like that you work through in the position as a skills coach. But the overriding factor for me is an old learning philosophy, learning style, which goes back, you know, 50 years, you know, cognitive, associative, and autonomous. And I think it gets a lot of things that like this get people try and change it because they want to put their own spin on it. You know, I just know it as cognitive, associative, autonomous. I mean, I could sit here today if I wanted to, and if I was writing a book or I wanted to say, I'd change it to 3 different things, but that's the concept.
Yeah.
So when you learn something for the first time, it's cognitive. You're thinking about it. Then as you learn that, you associate that skill to what it is you're trying to do. And then when you've actually mastered it, it becomes autonomous. And I think in rugby, we spend our time in the associative stage. We've never helped our players understand the cognitive, we actually haven't learned to pass the ball. You know, like this, I find this fascinating, not fascinating, I find it quite disappointing. When I came to rugby, you know, I could probably go to, I mean, at the moment, you go on the internet, there's people all around the internet teaching people how to pass the ball, and it's all different.
Yeah.
But you go onto a golf site, the golf swing is being taught, there is one golf swing. There's not someone getting out there saying, oh no, if you turn your hand here and you swing out here and you come through here, make sure you do this. No, the golf swing is the golf swing. And so there is a unique way to pass the ball properly, to generate the power you need to generate.
Do you think it's because rugby people just hadn't thought much about it until recently? Like, why do you think that is?
Well, I guess when I started as a skills coach, there's no one else I didn't know anyone else that was a skills coach. So the first thing I did was, I wonder who else is doing this, and there was no one else doing it. So that's why I had to go and look on the internet and different places. But there was no one in rugby as a skills coach. So I didn't have anyone to ring up and go, oh, what are you doing around the skills? So I had to design it all myself, which is fine. But then skills coaches became a bit of a thing, and what am I going to do? I'm going to teach players how to pass. Well, the first thing they do is they come up with a drill. Yeah, so, you know, so players love drills, you know, so it could be a 5v3, a 3v2, you know, a 6v4, whatever. And you do all these drills, the players love them. But if the players have got a poor passing technique, they're actually not going to get any better at their passing technique by playing that game or doing that drill. They'll get better at utilizing the skill level they have, but their skill won't improve.
Yeah.
So, and I think when you talk to coaches and they talk about skill, they've got all the drills in the world. I come up with, oh yeah, when we do this drill for our passing skills. Well, it's a drill, it's not a skill. So you have to actually go back, and if that was the case, I always sort of, without being arrogant or, you know, egotistical about things, when I talk about, I use golf as an analogy. A lot of skills coaches in rugby, if they were coaching golfers, they just go out and play 18 holes of golf every day. And that's what they would do. They would just go and play golf, because that's the way we coach rugby. We go out and we do drills. But if you watch a good golf coach, he's there, he's got half a backswing, just backswing here, come down to the ball. That's just part of the golf swing, you know, or it might be, they might have 2 sticks on the ground. You've got to take the club head back through the 2 sticks. Well, that's how we should be coaching rugby, if we, you know, on our skills. So on the pass, for example, I'll have a ball and it might be Adidas on the top or Gilbert, whatever the ball is, and I'll put it on the belly button, and they have that sign has to stay upright until it leaves my body. All right. So most players will start turning the ball straight away.
Yeah.
But that sign has to stay upright. I have to be able to see that sign all the way across my body before it leaves my body. Then I'm going to be passing well. So just doing an exercise like that with players will help improve their pass. So the cognitive level of the skill acquisition, I think, is massively underdeveloped and underused in rugby.
Did you find, even getting into the test level, that the skills weren't where they should be? Like, is this something that we should be starting at under sixes, under eights?
Absolutely.
And just
I
spending
agree.
more time on acquiring the skills and then adding the pressure as they go through the age groups and the levels?
Absolutely. I mean, you go to any sport that kids are learning, and kids are learning technique. It doesn't matter what sport it is. And I think we're very good at creating games, and we're very good at creating drills, but we're not actually helping our players pass the ball better. There's certain things you can do to kick, pass, tackle, jump, throw, scrum, high ball catch. There's certain things that your body needs to be doing to be really efficient and strong at. And if we're not teaching them those movements, then all we're doing is we're just allowing natural talent to come through to the top, rather than the natural talent gets you there, and then becoming very technically efficient will take you to the next level.
How do you structure that into your training? Will you do a skills block beforehand and afterwards? Would you add skills elements throughout your training session and throughout your week? Because obviously once you get into a game week, there's a limited amount of time to prepare for the opposition, go over the detail, all that kind of stuff. Plus you've got to add in the physical demands of the game as well. How do you attack it? How do you think about it?
Well, I think, I mean, if you go back to when I started, there were sort of windows of skills. Pre-season was a time to work on your skills. Well, again, I just come back to the golf analogy. If that was the case, then you'd only see golfers practicing their golf swing in January, and then they'd get out and keep playing. The golf swing is something they practice every day. So skills are something we need to do every day. And we're doing that now. There's no question we're doing that. But even to the point where, if you're doing a line-out session, you could use 20% of that time to get your hookers throwing well, jumpers jumping well, lifters lifting well, moving through the line-out well. You could use 20% of your time getting the individual skills of your line-out right before you start your line-out session. So lots of times I'll go watch coaches train, they'll get their line-outs, and the players will walk over and they'll start throwing line-outs. It takes them about 7 or 8 minutes, a few arguments, a few swear words, and suddenly the line-out's functioning. But it took them 6 or 7 minutes to get right. Well, instead of starting a line-out session with all that frustration, spend the 5 minutes doing the skills. Get the throwers just throwing some, like what I do is I'll get the hookers on their knees throwing to the locks who are standing there a couple of meters away, catching it in their hand. So suddenly the hookers are getting some throws in, the catchers are catching. Then they'll be off doing some footwork, then the lifters will be doing some medicine ball lifts, and they'll come in and they'll lift the locks, and then they'll throw to some pods, and then they'll start their lineouts. Well, that's all they've done in that 4 or 5 minutes there, is they've worked on their individual skill. So that's how you can do it inside a training week. The backs can start their back session with some punch passing, some pressure passing, some different things working through there. And so then when you can, and at the beginning of training, you might have a core skills rotation, some passing activities, some, where you're learning habit, you're changing habits. So you might do some passing, tackling, some breakdowns, some core activities. And then when you finish training, you go into individual plans where that's really individual to specific stuff. So you might only have the back three working on high ball catch. The hookers might be working on some strikes while the scrum halves are working on some box kicking or something like that. So through the course of your training, you might start with, you can start with a sort of a 3 by 3 minute rotation on skills, 3 by 2 minute rotation on skills, into team training, making sure that even in team training, you start with a little skill activity, and then you finish training and you're into some skills training. So you can actually incorporate that into every training session. A player, and again, it comes back to rugby. I go and watch different coaches work in different sports, and swimming's a classic, And I watched the swimming coach one year. He actually coached my son, and I watched him, and he had a one-on-one with every player in his squad. Now, he had 12 squad members. We have a lot more, but he had a one-on-one. He had probably 2 or 3 one-on-ones with every swimmer during a session. So those swimmers would go home from every session with a gem they received from their coach. Now, rugby's difficult. We've got a lot more players, but there's no reason why you can't manage that so you can get to every player during the week. Help them with a little one-on-one tidbit for their skill,
It also shows that the coach cares, which is pretty important for a player.
Yeah, and it was interesting watching him because he would give the instruction, he would make the change, and then he'd watch that player do it, or he'd watch that swimmer do it, and then he'd give feedback on the change. And I watch a lot of coaches, they'll say to a player, no, you need to get your feet in here for that tackle. And the player will be right. So then he'll walk off to somewhere else, and you'll see the player, this next time you'll do it, you look over to see if the coach is watching, and the coach is not watching. So I think it's really important, if you are in that skills coaching element, that if you give a player a tip, watch him do it, give him some feedback on how he just did it. That's better. Or no, maybe a little bit more. Let's have another go. And then when you see him do it, yeah, that's what you're after. Then move on to your next one. And be genuinely interested in helping your player get better. I think that'll show through to the players as well.
Do you look at other sports much to get insight or to learn anything? Like, particularly starting out, I know you had an professional AFL background. How important is it for coaches, just in general, not necessarily just rugby, but to look outside your sport for inspiration and ideas?
I think it's really important. I think a classic example would be the All Blacks back in years ago went to ballet for lifting, because
makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, you see a lot of people getting lifted in ballet, and it's effortless, and so it came back to the jumper having a lot of core strength. You're lifting someone off the ground. If they are just a rock solid core, it's a lot easier to lift them off the ground. So lifting, there was a focus on the lifter, but suddenly to be a great lift needed the jumper to be a great jumper. So the jumper needed to make sure they engaged the core and stayed rock solid and didn't have a sloppy core because they'd be heavier to lift. Little things. So you're always looking outside. And look, I'm a bit of a sports nut, and I'll watch different sports. I'll see different things, little coaching tips, and can I use that in rugby? What about that? Can I try that? I'm always sort of looking for something.
Mate, I won't take up too much more of your time. Just a couple more questions. What, from your experience, makes a good coach?
I think you got to feel for your players. You got to have, you've got to have. You can be a coach that knows every single thing there is about your playing group, which is one way of doing it, and I think that shows that you care. There's other ways. I think helping players understand how they can get better, working with your playing group so that they believe you care as well is important. You may care, but sometimes you might not show it the right way. So it's important that they understand that you do care. being good at your job, I think, is important. I think being, working on yourself to be good at your job. And just being, I think also the big one is, being honest. Don't play games with players' minds. Don't try and be a person who tries to play with players' minds and be too clever. Just be genuinely upfront and honest with your playing group and your staff, and treat them with respect.
I feel like mind games probably wouldn't work with this generation.
No, look, I don't, and I don't think it worked with any generation. I think, people see through it pretty quickly. And back when I played, you knew you were getting the mind games were on, but you wanted to be there anyway. You wanted to be part of it, so you'd accepted it. You copped ridicule. You copped slagging off by the coach. You copped whatever you copped, because that's just the way life was, and you wanted to be there, and you were passionate about playing, and you just accepted that that's the way things are at the moment, But I think, and I think also, the education that we had coming through when I went through school, you got punished for doing the wrong thing. So, and when you went into sport, you got punished for doing the wrong thing. And I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing, but certainly getting punished for doing the wrong thing doesn't necessarily help people do the right thing in the future. Sometimes they just become immune to the punishment and just keep doing it anyway. So I think it's helping people, learn and understand why you want them to change or why you want them to be better, and education, and then it's up to the player. If you've done all your education work and you've helped them grow, and they still don't want to be there or still can't come to grips with it, then they miss out. They're the ones that are missing out. I think you can't, as they say, you can't save every player, even though as a coach, you'd like to think you can.
If you could give one piece of advice to a coach just starting out, what would it be?
One piece of advice.
You can go more than one if you like. You can go more than one.
That's a good challenge, one piece. Well, I think putting your playing group first is a big one. Like, why are they turning up? Whether you're a club coach, why are your players digging holes in the ground or sitting behind a desk or behind a computer or driving a truck or doing something all day long to come to rugby? Why are they doing that? And understanding why they're doing it, and then assisting that to be the reason why they turn up. If they're doing it because they love the game of rugby, they want to get better, they want to have fun, then you've got to be the driver of that. If you've got a group of players that just want to become the best in the world because they're already good players and they want to learn, they want to come to training and they want to be challenged and they want to get better, then you've got to give them that. So understanding what it is your playing group, why are they there, and what do they want to get from the group? Why are they doing things? I think that's a good place to start. And also understand yourself. Why are you doing it? Understand, what it is that you're getting from it as well, so that you can always make sure that you keep enjoying it as well.
What's your relationship like with failure?
Well, I've got a saying on my wall at home that failure cannot cope with perseverance. So
love that.
That would be my relationship with failure. It's just an everyday part of my life that, but I'll just get up and go again tomorrow, because failure won't be there at the end of the day. It can't cope with perseverance, and that was a saying that Alan Jeans used to say when he was coaching me at Hawthorn back in the 80s. And it was something that I put up on the wall because, it's probably something I wasn't good at when I first started playing. Was if I couldn't do something, I lost enjoyment by not being able to do. And once I realized that if I stick at it, I'll probably be able to do it. And that's just stuck with me now, and it's up on my wall at home, and it's just there for me. So my relationship with failure is, it's an everyday part of life, but it can't cope with perseverance.
Failure can't cope with perseverance. I love that. I love that. Look, one of the many great things about doing this podcast is I've got to learn a lot as well. And I was lucky enough to do a podcast with Wayne Smith, and I asked him, what was it like when you wanted to try new things with the All Blacks? I can imagine that you would have wanted to know it worked before you tried it. And he said, we didn't think like that at all. We weren't afraid to try new things, and some things worked, some things didn't work, but that was the attitude that we have, and we weren't afraid to try things. And that totally flipped my own relationship with failure, because I'm only a brand new coach, but starting out, I was quite afraid of making mistakes, and just that simple message just changed the way that I think about it as well. So I really, really appreciate you sharing that, mate. Thank you.
Yeah, and mate, I think when you are trying something new, one of the things that, because I tried a lot of new things with the All Blacks, because they hadn't coached doing what I was doing when I got there. So that was a good thing for me, because I was doing stuff for the first time. But I was also put a bit of pressure on, because a lot of players are there like, oh, what are we doing this for? Or why are we doing this? So the one thing I asked from them is to give 100% commitment to trying something new. Then we can be 100% correct in the decision we make. If you only go half-hearted because it's something new and you don't really believe in it, we'll never really know if it works. So the only thing we ask for is go at this at 100 mile an hour. If it's a new jumping technique, if it's a new kicking stuff, if it's a new throwing, if it's new something, we want to try this, let's go at 100 mile an hour, give it 100%. And then if it doesn't work, we know it doesn't work. And we can look at each other in the eye and say, this is not going to work. We've just given it everything we've got. And I think that's important when you're trying something new. Give it everything you got. And if it works, then great. You found something new to work with.
I think it's such a helpful lesson for anyone to learn. You don't start out knowing everything, and sometimes making mistakes can really help you learn. And that's something that I found incredibly useful in my young career as a coach. Just a couple more questions, mate. Do you listen to any podcasts, read many books? Do you have any recommendations for us?
Well, I mean, books, I sort of read a few. I know that going back a long time now, Stephen Covey's, Seven Habits of Successful People. That's a strong one. Also, I liked Seligman's Learned Optimism.
Yeah.
Tim Galway's In the Inner Game of Tennis.
I haven't read that one. I might download that next.
Yeah, that's if you want to understand what goes on inside your head when you're competing, and how you can control. It was the first book that sort of was a bit spooky when I read it. I was like, sounds a bit weird, because he talks about self one and self two. One's a doer and one's a talker, and the talker never talks positively to you. The talker's always telling you can't do it, or don't, watch this. If you miss this line out, we could lose the game. Whereas the one, he just does. And I think it's a matter of control. And when you look back on it now, when I look back after I read that book, and you look back on it now, you realise that so accurate. The things that go on inside your head before you've even tried something. And I have a bit of fun with it. You'll be on a golf course. Oh, what about that bunker over on the right there? The bloke goes, oh, I didn't even see that bunker. And you point little things out like that. And all of a sudden you put a little negative thought into his head. So don't play golf with me, mate. It's not enjoyable.
Mate, I don't think you'd enjoy playing with me. I am terrible at golf. Mate, last question for you, mate. I thank you so much for this. I truly, truly appreciate your time. Looking back to 18-year-old Mick Byrne, what advice would you give him? if any?
I'd give him a lot, mate. To be fair, I'd give him stuff that I probably can't share here, but I'd certainly give him the advice to don't be self-conscious around making mistakes. Don't worry what people think of you. You know, and what I've done there is use the word I probably learnt the most is get rid of the word don't. Because I think that's what held me back for a long time. Is the word don't is used by parents, coaches alike, and we should get rid of that out of our vocabulary. Because if I'm coaching a player and I say to him, don't plant your feet in the tackle, what picture is he seeing in his head?
Planting your feet in the tackle.
Yeah. So, and that's what I was like as a kid. I was don't do this and don't do that and don't stuff this up or don't stuff that up. And I was saying it to myself so I wouldn't do it. If I was to say to my 18-year-old self again, I'd say, just tell yourself what it is you want to do. Yeah. Tell yourself what you're going to do. So don't worry about the don't do this. What is it you want to do? And talk to myself in that way. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Do this, do that. And get rid of the protection element. And it's not a negative element. People look at it as a negative element. I think it's a protection element. Parents use it a lot to protect their kids from harm. But in actual fact, they're putting the picture of that. So don't run across the road. You know, that's what they'll say to their kids. But the kids see run. The kids don't actually know what it is you want them to do. What it is you want? What is it that you want your kid to do? I want him to walk. Well, tell him to walk. Avoid saying don't run, because that's not what you want him to do. What is it you want him to do? I want him to walk. Well, tell him to walk. And that's what I'd say to myself. Get rid of the don't run and start telling myself to walk.
It's good advice. Good advice for coaches as well. Mick, thanks so much for your time, mate. I really enjoyed that.
Pleasure, mate. Anytime.